All right, guys, so this is where I get really weird feelings about Alex O'Connor as an animal rights activist. And I'm not trying to, come across as super virtuous here and be like, I'm a better activist than you. Like, no, like really, let's think about what was said here. Hey, what is going on, guys? So today we're going to be responding to Jordan Peterson's carnivore diet daughter, MIKHAILA Peterson, and her conversation with Alex O'Connor, otherwise known as Cosmic Skeptic on YouTube, who runs a vegan/atheist YouTube channel. Now, I've covered both Alex and MIKHAILA on my YouTube channel, but in very different lights. MIKHAILA Peterson has shown herself to lie about multiple things, and you can see this in two of my past videos. One of them is titled MIKHAILA Peterson's Anti-Vegan Arguments Fully Debunked, Oxford Union Debate, and the other is titled Proof MIKHAILA Peterson is Lying About Her Credentials. I mention this not because I'm trying to poison the well straight out the gate, but because MIKHAILA Peterson, when discussing things like carnivore and vegan nutrition, often makes many claims, specifically anecdotal claims, and when they're not anecdotal claims, she tends to just not cite any sources. And if someone has a past of lying, making anecdotal claims is going to be kind of problematic to listen to and trust. So if I'm just being honest, I do have a hard time taking her seriously after the couple of lies she's been caught in. Of course, lying in the past does not mean everything she's going to say now is going to be a lie, but you should be skeptical as I am. For obviously, her past of lying is indicative of a higher chance of her lying, and she very often refers back to her anecdotal experience on the carnivore diet, which she has been caught lying about, to justify things like the carnivore diet. Now, when it comes to Alex, I am generally a big fan of his work, especially his work on religion, but I did take issue with his video covering his conception of animal rights, and I covered that in a video titled Cosmic Skeptic is Wrong About Animal Rights. Here is why. So we're going to be responding to two people who I have a past of disagreeing with, one person much more than the other. And the video is about an hour and 12 minutes long, and there is a lot of fluff, so I will not be responding to the whole thing. So let's start this off by viewing MIKHAILA Peterson only 17 minutes into her podcast with Alex, contradicting herself on her position when it comes to animal rights.
It's funny because everybody who's concerned about this is concerned about suffering on some level. So animal suffering, right? For people who are more concerned about the climate, I think they're basically concerned about human suffering, right? Because if the climate gets all screwed up, then eventually that leads to human suffering. And what I'm concerned about is just human suffering. And I know, and I'm biased from my experience and from what I've seen for people who've gone paleo and kind of gone back to ancestral eating, is being chronically ill. Like I would stop the suffering of somebody who's chronically ill. And I don't even, like, animals don't even cross my mind, like that amount of suffering compared to a human being that's chronically ill. And so I think that's where we might differ, unless I'm
potentially
mistaken.
I mean, it requires a bit more digging. For a start, you said that you only care about human suffering. I should
I don't
clarify.
only care. That's not true. And what I'm concerned about is just human suffering.
You said that you only care about human suffering. I should
I don't
clarify.
only care. That's not true. What I'm concerned about is just human suffering.
So she says what she's concerned about is just human suffering, which presumably the word just implies she only cares about human suffering. Alex points this out, and then she says she doesn't just only care about human suffering. So we're 17 minutes into MIKHAILA Peterson's video, and apparently she only just cares about human suffering and doesn't only just care about human suffering. Let's keep going.
We should be making a move towards regenerative farming. And the more people that buy meat from regenerative farms, the more likely regenerative farms are to take off. But I would rather see a push towards regenerative farming than towards veganism, because I think those are going to have major health repercussions that we can't foresee at the moment, or that we are foreseeing but not attributing to less meat.
MIKHAILA says here that we should be pushing toward regenerative farming and not veganism, as if you can't have both at the same time, or that both are mutually exclusive. But the thing is, you can have veganism and regenerative farming simultaneously. Take veganic agriculture, for example, or this farming method, which resulted in an overall carbon negative compared to white oaks pastures, which she will bring up later in this conversation, which only resulted in a 2/3 reduction in carbon emissions compared to traditional animal farming. Not a carbon negative, just a reduction. When we look at more environmentally friendly attempts to practice plant agriculture, not only do we see reduced emissions, but there are also reports of a carbon negative, meaning that this kind of plant agriculture in effect emits less than 0 carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases. To be carbon negative means to offset more carbon through carbon capture, sequestration, or avoidance than you contribute to the environment. And when we compare this carbon negative report to what is emitted by White Oak Pastures, which is a multi-generational 3,200 acre farm located in Bluffton, Georgia, who is practicing regenerative animal agriculture, we see their carbon footprint just being 66% lower than traditional animal-based farming. She also says that one of the reasons she wants a push toward regenerative animal farming is because veganism has health repercussions that we can't foresee at the moment. And then she corrects herself and says, well, these health repercussions that we are foreseeing, but we're not attributing to less intake of meat.
But I would rather see a push towards regenerative farming than towards veganism, because I think those are going to have major health repercussions that we can't foresee at the moment, or that we are foreseeing but not attributing to less meat.
Although she corrects herself, I do have issues with both claims, so let's just cover both of them. She of course provides no evidence for both of these claims, and the first claim itself is very odd. She says there are negative health repercussions that we can't currently foresee that come from a vegan diet. Is she trying to claim that we can't see them coming beforehand, but we can see them in rigorous health outcome data that indeed veganism is resulting in negative health repercussions? If so, where is the evidence supporting the claim that yes, there are negative health repercussions of the vegan diet, but we just cannot currently foresee them? And for the second claim, she corrects herself and says, well, we are foreseeing them, but we are not attributing them to less meat intake. So presumably she has enough data on negative vegan health outcomes that she can now foresee or predict beforehand that veganism will cause people negative health repercussions. Where in this 1 hour and 13-minute discussion did she cite data supporting this claim? Absolutely nowhere.
Vegans shouldn't be under the illusion that we're not responsible for any animal suffering. Of course we are. We need to, most people know about the problem of crop deaths, right? Like the animals are being killed in the production of plants.
While I agree that it is true that the vegan lifestyle does cause some amount of animal suffering, I'm not so sure that the vegan lifestyle causes more suffering than would have otherwise occurred had the crop fields not been placed there to begin with. This is because crop fields are replacing wild field where loads of suffering and death also occur. I've covered this topic on my channel before many times and recommend watching my video on crop deaths to gain a better understanding, but in short, it may very well be the case that crop fields actually, on the net, increase utility given the horrific conditions they are replacing the wild. I'm not claiming that this is the case, I'm just saying that it very well could be, and that this needs to be mentioned in conversation when crop deaths get brought up. Because yes, you can agree that crop fields cause suffering, but what if the degree of suffering that it causes is actually less than what would have otherwise occurred had the wild field been there instead? And if this was the case, that would mean that crop fields actually make the world a better place. Again, I'm not taking a position here that is firm, I'm just making these points because crop fields may actually be a good thing, and whenever people like Cosmic bring it up, they act like it's for sure on the net a bad thing. And he's also a utilitarian, so this discussion would probably be of interest to him.
You should talk to Diana Rogers, because your argument makes sense if meat wasn't, I think, necessary for health. And I think that there's a lack of studies. I think that the studies are there, and I think Diana Rogers, who's a dietitian, who does, she wrote The Sacred Cow, and she's very interested in regenerative agriculture, regenerative farming.
All right, so MIKHAILA is trying to convince Alex to discuss regenerative animal farming with Diana Rogers, who is a large advocate for regenerative animal farming. I'm not going to go into all the things she's gotten wrong and why you probably shouldn't do that in this video because this video would just be too long. I do plan on covering her at some point though. So of course, don't take my claims about her to be 100% true, as I provided no evidence yet. So after the Diana Rogers stuff, she implies that meat is necessary for health, and her evidence for this is anecdotes she's read online and then studies she's read.
But I think your argument would stand if it was just about taste and if we could get all the nutrients from a vegan diet. But I think that I don't think long-term veganism helps people. And that's like mostly what I've read online, anecdotes, and then studies.
I don't think I need to cover the problem of relying on unverified, not well-controlled anecdotes to justify nutrition claims. And she makes no reference to any specific studies when saying it was also studies that led to her conclusion that meat is necessary for health. So I'm not sure what to really say here. She didn't provide evidence. Again, huge shocker.
I also know that if you put really, really young kids on a vegan diet, that can be really hard on their brain. But if they eat animal products, it's not.
She then makes mention of vegan children and how feeding a child a vegan diet can be hard on the brain. And no sources cited again. What a big shocker. I recommend you watch a video I did with Dr. Matthew Nagra and Matt Medora on the science of vegan children. We cover around 9 studies on vegan children very in depth. You guys notice that? When I make strong claims or, convey particular ideas about things, I provide sources. Isn't that just fucking insane? let's keep going. All right, so I'm just going to be covering real quick the scalability of regenerative animal agriculture because it's what MIKHAILA Peterson keeps bringing up in this discussion. And I'm not sure if she's aware just how awful or how hard it would be to scale regenerative animal ag globally. When you take into account the current demand for meat, regenerative animal agriculture is not scalable globally. So let's just talk about grass-fed and then we'll talk about regenerative agriculture for scaling. So with respect to grass-fed beef, current projections estimate that in order for grass-fed methods to provide everyone on Earth with current levels of animal protein intake, we would need between 3 to 35 Earths. Obviously, this is just insane. And when it comes to regenerative animal agriculture and everybody being on a carnivore diet, we would need somewhere between 4.5 to 52.5 Earths. So obviously, this isn't feasible. Grass-fed beef and regenerative animal agriculture on the carnivore diet, which she proposes, is not feasible. And not just for the carnivore diet, the first set of calculations I showed were for just meeting our Earth's current demand for animal protein. A big thank you to Nutrivore for his research and calculations on this topic. Definitely go subscribe to him. He will also be making another appearance shortly.
Part of the reason I've been fighting back against kind of what I've called the vegan ideology is because my concern is we have these people who are implementing agendas in major cities, so doing like Meatless Monday and things, without the proper scientific background. So we don't have proper studies on these things. Now we have studies like, oh, an increase in meat increases your risk of, I don't know, everything, right? Like there's any study out there that you can say it increases your risk of heart disease or et cetera. Most of those studies aren't done isolating meat. They're done combining everything else you eat with meat. So the bun, the pop, like everything.
So we actually have multiple studies isolating meat. Here is one isolating meat and coming to the conclusion that heavy intakes of total red meat does increase risk of chronic disease. I'll be playing an old clip from one of my older videos in which Nutrivore covers the findings.
We have literal analyses like where we see calories going down as meat consumption goes up, and we see hypertension going down, we see type 2 diabetes going down. We see fruits and vegetables are the same. We see fish are the same. Eggs are the same. Chicken is largely the same. Like all other dietary exposures, physical activity is the same. Smoking is the same. Like all of these other exposures that we typically consider to be confounding, they're all balanced across the quantiles of intake. We see meat go up as like a univariate exposure. It's just going up and everything else is held largely constant. And we still see that risk goes up. So clearly there are diet disease relationships, or clearly there's plausibility for the idea that there are diet disease relationships that are irrespective of energy balance.
And aside from that paper, here is the Nurses' Health study that also isolated meat, concluding that red meat consumption is associated with an increased risk of total cardiovascular disease and cancer mortality, and that substitution of other healthy protein sources for red meat is associated with a lower mortality risk. And here's a food substitution analysis from this paper supporting the second part of the conclusion. Nuts did a great job in replacing red meat here. And here is a third paper titled Meat Consumption and Risk of 25 Common Conditions, Outcome-Wide Analyses in 475,000 Men and Women in the UK Biobank Study. And this paper found that red meat did increase risk of heart disease. So yes, these papers exist.
Well, you know, as far as I'm aware, it is possible, certainly for adults, and a lot of dietetic associations across the world are saying that it's you can get all the nutrients required for a healthy living at all stages of life. But you're right, like we should be skeptical of these things, and we need to, especially when it comes to raising children on these diets, we want to be sure, right? We don't want to be sort of like, well, this dietetic association seems to think it's fine, so let's go ahead and do it. It's like, let's really do some research here. But just like the research into the carnivore diet, which you say is like brand new. I mean,
yeah, it's brand
science
new.
on the vegan stuff is still in its infancy too. Like this is all fairly new, so we do need to be careful.
All right, so I'm going to be coming for Alex a bit here. Alex, I respect you, but I'm a little bit confused by what you're saying here. You compare the vegan diet nutritionally to the carnivore diet nutritionally, saying that both are in their infancy. While I agree that the carnivore diet is for sure in its infancy when it comes to research, I don't know why Cosmic Skeptic has the view that the science backing the vegan diet is also in its infancy stage, just like the carnivore diet. The vegan diet has been studied for a very long period of time, and we have plenty of health outcome data showing its benefits or lack of negative health effects when done and supplemented properly. Perhaps Cosmic Skeptic is just unaware of this, which, you know, nothing against Alex, perhaps this is the case. Not all ethical vegans are super familiar with some of the top scientific literature supporting vegan diets. It also seems likely to me that Alex isn't familiar with this literature because of how many times MIKHAILA made the baseless claim that meat is necessary or that there's long-term negative health effects from a vegan diet, and he just sat there and didn't really give her any pushback. Maybe this is because he really is unaware of the data, or he wasn't trying to like be too aggressive and wanted this to be more of a conversation. Not really sure, but let's keep going.
I think that there's a lot of overlap between how you're thinking and how I'm thinking. And I think it all kind of chalks up to, if you could do a vegan diet and be equally as healthy, even if it's more difficult to achieve that, but if you're careful and you can be equally as healthy, then I don't see anything wrong with it. The only reason that I see something wrong with it is because I believe that you're missing key nutrients, and I think the only way to rectify that position are to have more studies and properly done studies.
So we have more baseless claims coming from MIKHAILA Peterson concerning the negative health effects of a vegan diet. Is anybody surprised? I definitely am. I mean, she literally said we can be missing key nutrients, but didn't name any of these key nutrients, so nothing of real substance to respond to here. Now, to be fair, she did say that in order to rectify her claims, we do need studies that are done properly. I'm not really sure what done properly means, but MIKHAILA, I provided plenty of evidence supporting the health benefits or the, neutral effects of the vegan diet. So I'm curious what she thinks of these papers.
And so even if we're sort of not sure what we think ethically about taking the lives of animals if they've had a net positive existence, which I'm actually quite sympathetic to the view that if they genuinely have a net positive existence and that existence is parasitic on the idea that they will be killed eventually, that might actually be good for the animal, probably is good for the animal.
Regenerative farming, maybe,
which
depending on the farm.
Interestingly, isn't quite the same thing as saying that you have the right to kill them. I mean, it might be the case that it is actually better for the animal to bring them into existence and then kill them. But as Jeff McMahon, who was at the event in Oxford, pointed out in a pretty wonderful essay on the eating of animal products, even if it were the case that this animal wouldn't exist if we didn't plan to kill it, and it was better for the animal to exist and then be killed, once it exists, it's still arguable that you don't have the right to take its life, because now that it exists, there's it's like an interest that you're upsetting by killing it. It's a bit of a sort of sidetrack.
All right, guys, so this is where I get really weird feelings about Alex O'Connor as an animal rights activist. And I'm not trying to come across as super virtuous here and be like, I'm a better activist than you. No, really, let's think about what was said here. Alex said he is sympathetic to the view that if an animal has a net positive existence, that it might in fact be good to have brought them into existence and killed them. Although Alex backtracks and brings up a speech from Jeff McMahon covering how once you bring the animal into existence, it is then arguable that you don't have the right to take the animal's life, the fact that Alex said he was sympathetic to this view as an animal rights activist bothers me a bit. Presumably one of the goals of the animal rights movement today is to rid animals of their commodity and property status and how they're just viewed as resources by humans. Assuming Alex shares this goal, it is weird to know that he remains sympathetic to this view. I believe he is a utilitarian, and maybe that is what makes him sympathetic to the view, because technically the cow's existence in this case results in a net positive increase in well-being. And I don't think that when Alex says he is sympathetic to this view that he necessarily agrees with it, but just saying you are sympathetic to this view is odd to me. Imagine somebody saying the same thing about breeding mentally disabled humans into existence who are now given positive lives only to be killed for meat. Would Alex say he is sympathetic to the view that we should be breeding mentally disabled humans into net positive existences where they will be commodified and exploited only to be eventually murdered for meat? If not, why would he be sympathetic in the case of cows but not humans? Assuming Alex does have this differential moral intuition toward both scenarios, what is the morally relevant difference between the two that causes Alex to be sympathetic in one case and not the other? Here's the thing. I could never see somebody like Earthling Ed or Joey Carbstrong be like, I am sympathetic to the idea of breeding animals into a net positive existence where they are still viewed as commodities, resources, and property, only to be eventually murdered prematurely for a hamburger. This may be my deontological views coming in with objecting to considering animals property and commodities, which maybe Alex doesn't share because he is a pure utilitarian, but I'm not sure. I do like that he mentioned the speech from Jeff McMahon and why you wouldn't have the right to kill the animal after having brought them into a, net positive existence, but I don't know. Alex comes across as having some pretty non-vegan intuitions here. Why did he make mention of what Jeff said and then not be like, and I agree with that, by the way? He didn't do that. He just kind of brought it up as an objection to his sympathy to the situation where you breed animals into a net positive existence. You would think an animal rights activist would be like, and then Jeff said this, and I agree with that because we're still going to be viewing these animals as resources and commodities in this case and killing them. You know what I mean? As an animal rights activist, I don't know how you could say you sympathize with this and then bring up an objection and then not side with the objection. Let me know what you guys think. Am I just tripping here? It just, again, seems a little odd for an animal rights activist to be sympathetic to a worldview where it's okay to give animals good lives, but then take away their right to their lives and kill them because they had, good lives, and on the net it was good. Like, can you really call yourself an animal rights activist when you sympathize with that position? All right, guys, so that's the end of the video. Of course, we skipped through a lot because there was a lot of fluff. And yeah, I mean, I just want MIKHAILA Peterson to, empirically justify her claims. I'm curious what Cosmic Skeptic thinks about the whole crop testing I mentioned with the wild fields. I'm curious if he can elaborate a little more on how he sympathizes with the, killing, the breeding and killing, exploitation and murder, commodification of, animals who have net positive lives for hamburgers. Like, it just said it a million times in this video, just seems very odd to me. So if you're interested in supporting my work, you can support me on Patreon and get early access to videos. And if you don't know, I do have a book going over most, if not all, of the anti-vegan arguments you're going to be hearing online, fully debunked. You can find that at the pinned comment below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude,
Fuck off, I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,